So to forge ahead, because we have 4,000 years to go.
I'm ready to go.
So we enter the age of chiefdoms, then we enter the age of cities, in a sense, and religion is playing more of a moral role and much more of a political role over time.
And a legal role.
And a legal
The
role.
origins of international law can be found. All these early treaties are validated by the gods in a really pervasive and important way. Yeah, and then in the ancient states, you know, I argue that you start seeing these various components that eventually constitute the Judeo-Christian tradition, and I think, you know, like a God of universal concern, or a God who claims all of humanity as his providence. You know, you see father figure gods. So the various elements that eventually combine in the Middle East to form the Abrahamic God are showing up in Egypt, in Mesopotamia. I mean, not surprisingly, in the neighborhood of Israel. And then monotheism.
And then monotheism.
Then monotheism. Now,
except that it's not. I mean, you essentially there's to vastly overgeneralize. There's a debate over the origins of monotheism, particularly the origins of monotheism in ancient Israel. To what extent should we perceive this as a kind of instantaneous or short-term theological breakthrough, and to what extent should we view it as the product of an as the title of your book says, an evolutionary process that takes place over hundreds of years and starts with Yahweh as a god among gods in a pantheon, moves towards something that you call monolatry, basically, where you're worshiping one god but aren't claiming that that's the only god, and eventually becomes monotheism. And that's the story that you tell. You tell a story of evolution rather than...
Right. I mean, my bias is in favor of a kind of evolutionary, more gradualistic account of the development of religion. I wouldn't call myself an atheist, but I'm also not a Christian, Jew, or Muslim, so I don't accept the claims of special and sudden revelation. And so I do view monotheism as emerging as a result of kind of discernible social political forces. And this actually illustrates, the emergence of monotheism in my telling illustrates what it is I think brings out the best and worst in religion. What brings out tolerance in a religion and what brings out intolerance. As I said, I think if you see yourself in a non-zero-sum relationship, potentially win-win relationship people, you're going to be more tolerant of their religion. And I see monotheism as beginning with a polytheism grounded in this kind of non-zero-sum perception of Israel's environment, and a perception that's very open to respect for gods of neighboring nations, that moves as an increasingly zero-sum view of Israel's neighborhood develops. Gods start getting excluded. This is a highly simplified account. And then during the exile, I'm arguing, along with some scholars, but certainly not all, that monotheism does not arrive until the exile. Then with the exile, for various reasons, you get true monotheism. And I also argue that because it's a series of kind of zero-sum perceptions, which are grounded in reality. I mean, Israel had had a tough history at this point. It was in a bad neighborhood. The exile was a trauma and a humiliation. And I argue that monotheism, when it emerges, is characterized by a very belligerent and retributive air. There's a happy ending I'll get to in a second if I've offended anybody, but and it happens right after the exile. It doesn't even have to wait for Christianity when in my account, God turns good. But the earliest, if you accept the mainstream dating of texts, which dating of texts is pretty contentious with the Hebrew Bible, but the earliest unambiguously monotheistic declaration in a prophetic text is the part of Isaiah that scholars call Second Isaiah, thought to have been written during the exile. Very, very monotheistic, and a lot of retribution and a relationship between the two. I mean, to oversimplify my argument, it's as if Israel is at this point, the prophets are dreaming of an apocalypse, as people who have had a bad time often do. They're dreaming of a time when the fortunes will be reversed, they'll be vindicated, they'll be on top finally. And Second Isaiah is imagining this day when the nations that have persecuted Israel will be subordinate to it. And it's as if, it's almost explicit in places, that so thorough is Israel's triumph going to be that it's not just that Israel's God is going to beat their gods, which went without saying in those days. If a nation conquered another nation, it was because its God had defeated the other nation. But further, they were going to be informed that their gods don't even exist. Okay, it was the ultimate retribution, I argue. Now, right after the exile, Israel, Cyrus the Great of Persia, conquers the Babylonians who have mistreated the Israelites. The exiles go home. Now, for the first time, Israel is in a secure neighborhood because its neighbors are fellow members of the Persian Empire. It's a non-zero-sum environment. It's a nice, secure imperial platform. I argue that if you accept, you know, kind of mainstream plausible dating of texts, you start seeing a God, you start seeing an inclusive monotheism, and you start seeing a God who extends compassion to former enemies like Assyrians and Moabites, and that even some of the terminology for God suggests a theology that's trying to draw, that's trying to encompass neighboring peoples, even some people who may not worship God by the same name as the Israelites. So that's monotheism.